to a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak. Dan's father, Phil, and his sister, Shelley, share in this unending sorrow. Dan was a devoted father, brother, and son. Dan's life was marked by his devotion to family, education, and community. He was a loving, caring, and inspiring person. His academic journey included studying politics and philosophy at Harvard University.
It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday morning. The kind of morning where nothing feels urgent, where life moves slowly, predictably. But somewhere in Tallahassee, Florida, on a quiet suburban street, a man was about to be executed in broad daylight. And the most terrifying part? The people closest to him would later claim they never saw it coming. But the signs, it were always there. Before we go any further, welcome to Fearful Crime, where we expose the darkest truths hiding behind seemingly perfect lives. If you're drawn to real stories that unravel layer by layer, stay with us, because this one only gets darker. It was July 18, 2014. The summer heat had already settled over Tallahassee when Dan Markel pulled into the driveway of his home on Trescott Drive. He was a respected law professor, brilliant, meticulous, a devoted father of 2 young boys. On paper, his life looked solid. But as he parked his car, someone was waiting. A man hidden in the shadows stepped forward. 2 shots rang out, and in seconds Dan Markel lay dying in his own driveway. The shooter disappeared just as quickly as he arrived. At first, police believed this had to be random, a robbery gone wrong perhaps, but almost immediately things didn't add up. Nothing was stolen. The shots were precise, targeted, controlled. This wasn't random, this was personal. Just hours later, Dan's ex-wife, Wendy Adelson, received a phone call that would change everything. She wasn't at home. A Best Buy technician had been there earlier fixing a television. After that, she'd been working on her laptop, planning her day like normal. When the phone rang, it wasn't the police. It was her real estate agent. The message was vague, confused, almost hesitant. "I heard there was a shooting on Trescott." Wendy didn't immediately connect the dots. Why would she? Then the second call came. This one was different. This time the words landed like a physical blow. "Your ex-husband, Daniels, has been shot. He's not going to survive." Silence followed. Then tears, or at least what sounded like tears. Investigators would later replay this moment again and again, not for what she said, but for what she didn't. She never asked how he was shot, never asked who did it, never asked if her children were safe. Instead, she unraveled, emotionally, verbally, and almost too perfectly. Within minutes, detectives were with her, trying to understand where she'd been that morning. Wendy explained that she hadn't left her house until noon. She said she'd been working, doing laundry, preparing to go out later. She mentioned a quick drive, a blocked road, a detour, small details that felt strangely rehearsed. She told them she had unknowingly driven past the crime scene, that she didn't notice anything unusual. But something else stood out. While police were still trying to figure out who would want Dan dead, Wendy began suggesting why someone might. She floated theories. Old grudges, professional enemies, jealous lovers. She even hinted that someone might have done this for her, without her asking. And that was when the room shifted, because innocent people don't usually think that way. As investigators dug deeper, they realized Dan Markel's life wasn't as peaceful as it looked. Beneath the academic success and polished image was a bitter custody battle, simmering resentment, and a family dynamic filled with tension. Dan and Wendy's divorce hadn't just been emotional, it was war. A war over their children, a war over control, and a war that had already drawn blood, just not in court. What no one knew yet was that this murder would eventually expose a web of lies involving family loyalty, secret relationships, paid killers, and a mother willing to do anything to protect her own. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a plan. And the people behind it were closer than anyone imagined. Before Dan Markel became a murder victim, he was a husband. And before Wendy Adelson became a grieving ex-wife, she was a woman slowly losing control of the life she believed she deserved. On the surface, their relationship looked impressive, even enviable. Dan was brilliant, a Harvard-educated law professor with a sharp mind and an even sharper moral compass. He believed in structure, principles, and rules. Wendy was charming, articulate, and socially magnetic. She knew how to walk into a room and make people feel like she belonged there. They met through a Jewish dating site, encouraged by Wendy's mother, Donna, who saw Dan as a perfect match, intelligent, successful, respectable. At first it worked. They married, built a home, and eventually had 2 sons. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect academic family. But inside that home, something was breaking. Dan was rigid. He valued discipline, routine, and control. Wendy was emotional, expressive, and deeply sensitive to criticism. What started as small disagreements grew into constant tension. And the cracks showed early. At their wedding, Wendy's family paid for the catering, but none of the food was kosher. To most guests, it was a detail. To Dan, it was a statement, a sign that his values didn't matter. That moment would echo for years. As time passed, Wendy felt increasingly suffocated. Dan wanted structure. She wanted freedom. He wanted stability. She wanted movement. When Dan accepted a position at Florida State University, Wendy followed, but her heart never fully settled in Tallahassee. She missed South Florida, her family, her sense of identity. The marriage deteriorated quietly, until it didn't. One day, Dan returned from a work trip to find half his home emptied. Furniture gone, personal items missing, divorce papers waiting. Wendy had left her and she'd taken the children. For Dan, it was a betrayal he never saw coming. For Wendy, it was survival. But the separation didn't bring peace. It ignited a war. What followed was a bitter custody battle that consumed both of them. Dan fought to keep his sons in Tallahassee. Wendy wanted to move back to South Florida, closer to her parents, particularly her mother, Donna, who had always been deeply involved in her life. The court sided with Dan. Wendy could leave. But the children could not. That ruling shattered everything. Because to Wendy, that decision didn't just limit her freedom, it trapped her. And to Donna Adelson, it was an unforgivable insult. Donna was not the kind of woman who accepted no. She was used to getting what she wanted, through persistence, pressure, and influence. Friends and family later described her as controlling, intense, and deeply protective of her children, especially Wendy. And now, in her mind, a man was standing between her daughter and happiness. That man was Dan Markel. Behind closed doors, resentment grew. Phone calls were made. Plans were discussed. And resentment slowly hardened into something much darker. Meanwhile, Dan was rebuilding. He was dating again, thriving professionally, settling into a routine with his kids. Friends described him as hopeful, even optimistic. And that made things worse. Because while Dan was moving on, Wendy felt like she was losing control of the narrative. Then something changed. Her behavior shifted. Friends noticed she spoke about Dan differently. Colder, more detached, sometimes even mocking. And then came the comments. Casual, offhand, almost jokes. She'd mention how life would be easier if Dan just wasn't around. How problems would disappear if certain people disappeared too. Most people brushed it off, but some remembered. Because when violence finally came, those words would echo loudly. As investigators would later uncover, this wasn't a spontaneous crime. It was the end of a long emotional countdown. A countdown fueled by resentment, entitlement, and a belief that consequences could always be avoided. And at the center of it all was a family so used to control that losing it became unbearable. By the time investigators began digging deeper, one thing became painfully clear. Dan Markel's murder wasn't impulsive. It was organized. And someone with money, motive, and connections had made it happen. The deeper detectives looked, the more one name kept resurfacing: Charlie Adelson. Wendy's older brother. The golden child. The one who handled things. Charlie Adelson was a successful periodontist living in South Florida. Flashy, confident, wealthy. The kind of man who drove luxury cars, told crude jokes, and believed problems could be solved with money. Lots of money. To friends, he was charming and generous. To family, he was the fixer. And to investigators, he was becoming impossible to ignore. During Wendy's interrogation, she mentioned Charlie casually, too casually. She talked about him constantly, offering details nobody asked for. What car he drove, where he worked, how busy he always was, how impossible it would be for him to be involved. It felt rehearsed, like she was trying to protect a narrative before anyone questioned it. And then came the comment that made detectives freeze. Wendy admitted that her brother had once joked about hiring a hitman. She laughed it off, said it was dark humor, a joke about how expensive it would be to take care of Dan instead of buying her a TV. But investigators didn't laugh, because timing matters, and this joke came before Dan was killed. As police dug into phone records, another name surfaced: Catherine Katie Magbanua. She was Charlie's on-again, off-again girlfriend, a single mother, financially struggling, and deeply connected to two men who would soon become central to the case. Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia, two men with criminal histories, two men who needed money, and two men who just happened to be in Tallahassee on the morning Dan Markel was murdered. Surveillance cameras captured a car speeding away from the crime scene, a Toyota Prius, not just any Prius, one with a mismatched side mirror and a missing hubcap. Investigators traced it to a rental. The renters? Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. Phone data placed them in Tallahassee the night before the murder, and right near Dan's house at the exact time of the shooting. They had driven more than 7 hours from South Florida. They didn't know Dan. They had no connection to Tallahassee, except one: Katie. And Katie was tied directly to Charlie. When confronted, Luis Rivera broke. He confessed. He said the murder was a paid hit. He admitted that he and Sigfredo were hired to kill Dan Markel, and that the money came through Katie. But the money, he said, wasn't hers. It came from Charlie. The motive? Dan was in the way. According to Rivera, Charlie wanted Dan gone so Wendy could move back to South Florida with the kids, and so the family could be whole again. No custody battles, no court orders, no obstacles, just freedom. And it wasn't impulsive. It was planned, carefully, coldly, with money, burner phones, and distance. As investigators followed the trail, bank records revealed tens of thousands of dollars flowing into Katie's accounts. Checks, cash, payments that made no sense for her lifestyle or employment. And when police listened to recorded jail calls between Charlie and Katie, they heard something chilling. They weren't talking like innocent people. They were talking like co-conspirators trying to stay ahead of the law. Careful with words, code phrases, warnings, reassurance, damage control. Then came the arrests. Sigfredo Garcia was charged with first-degree murder. Luis Rivera took a plea deal and agreed to testify. Katie Magbanua was arrested soon after. And finally, years later, Charlie Adelson himself was arrested and charged with murder. But the story still wasn't finished. Because one person remained untouched. One person who had been there from the beginning. One person who stood to gain everything. The matriarch. The mother. The woman who never accepted no. Donna Adelson. For years, the Adelson family believed they were untouchable. They had money. They had influence. They had lawyers. And for a long time it worked. Even after arrests were made. Even after evidence stacked up. One person still walked free. Donna Adelson. While her son Charlie sat behind bars awaiting trial, investigators continued listening. Every phone call, every coded sentence, every whispered plan. And Donna talked. A lot. She spoke as if she were untouchable, as if the system simply didn't apply to her. In one recorded call, she and Charlie discussed the investigation like it was an inconvenience, not a murder case. They talked in riddles, half jokes, half confessions, convinced they were smarter than everyone listening. But the FBI was listening, and they were patient. What finally broke the case wide open was arrogance. Donna believed she was running out of time. With her son facing life in prison, she began to panic, and panic makes people sloppy. Investigators learned that Donna and her husband were planning to flee the country. Not for a vacation, not to visit family, but to disappear. They purchased one-way tickets to Vietnam, a country with no U.S. extradition treaty. They packed their bags quietly. They didn't tell friends. They didn't tell family. They thought they were ahead of the law. They were wrong. On the day of the flight, law enforcement was waiting. As Donna and her husband approached the gate, officers stepped in. Calm, professional, unavoidable. She looked stunned, confused, angry. She asked if she could help her husband first. She asked where she was being taken. She asked why this was happening. But she already knew. She was arrested on the spot, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation to commit murder. The matriarch had fallen. In court, the full picture finally came together. Wiretaps revealed how Donna had encouraged the plan, how she spoke in coded language, how she believed Dan was the obstacle to her daughter's happiness and therefore disposable. Prosecutors painted a chilling portrait, a mother who believed she was protecting her family no matter the cost, even if that cost was another man's life. Charlie was convicted. Sigfredo received life. Katie was sentenced. Luis Rivera testified and served his time. And Donna now sits behind bars, stripped of the power she once wielded. As for Wendy, she remains uncharged, but questions still swirl around her role. What did she know? When did she know it? And how much did she benefit from the plan? To this day, those questions linger. Dan Markel never got to see his sons grow up. He never saw justice in real time. But his story did something powerful. It exposed how privilege can rot into entitlement, how love can twist into obsession, and how people who believe they're above the law often destroy themselves trying to prove it. This wasn't just a murder. It was a family implosion, a slow-burning collapse fueled by control, ego, and silence. And it serves as a warning. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers in the dark. They're the ones sitting at your dinner table. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think, let us know in the comments. What do you think justice should look like in cases like this? And if you want more deep, chilling, true crime stories told with clarity and truth, subscribe to Fearful Crime, because some stories are too important to forget.